we just haven't thought of retirement beyond the need for financial security, and it's about time we started to do that.
You're listening to Life 2, a podcast from Don Ezra and Commonwealth. Don Ezra is a former co-chair of Russell Investments Global Consulting and creator of the retirement website donezra.com. His latest book is Life 2, How to Get to and Enjoy What Used to Be Called Retirement. Commonwealth is a mission-driven business that works with associations, unions, and employers to provide collective retirement plans and has been recognized internationally for its work in expanding access to retirement security. On Life 2, we take a tour of the retirement life cycle, from the time you start saving to your retirement years, while also taking a look at the Global Retirement Challenge. Each episode features an in-depth interview with a leading expert on the topic, followed by The Personal Touch, a segment in which Don breaks down these expert insights and how they might apply to your personal situation. Keep in mind that the podcast is for educational purposes and should not be considered investment, tax, financial, or other professional advice. We start off the episode with Commonwealth's founding partner, Alex Mazer.
People seek out life coaches when they're trying to achieve more fulfillment or pursue a new career. So why not have a coach to help you with the challenging life transition of retirement? You don't have to do it alone. Now there are retirement coaches to help you set goals and figure out how to structure your life for greater satisfaction.
We explore how retirement coaching works and its benefits, both psychological and financial, with an eminent member of the profession. With over 30 years' experience in the investment industry, Jon Glass is now a retirement coach and joins us from Sydney, Australia. Well, Jon, we're absolutely delighted to chat with you because up to now, all our discussions have concerned the financial angle. But now we're happy to have you, a retirement coach, to talk about the psychological transition to retirement. And we know you have a tagline. Perhaps you can tell us about the tagline and expand on that.
Sure, and thank you very much for inviting me onto your podcast. The tagline that I use, and that's my sign-off in my blog posts as well as making an appearance on my business card, is this: retirement. You won't know what it is like until you get there. And the reason I say that is that, and warning, big word coming, retirement is a heterogeneous experience. Everyone's different. And so from my point of view, as a coach, I need to be aware that the experience will be different for each client or potential client, and that my own experience in moving from full-time work to part-time work has also been, and I stress this, my own experience. Now, it's not to say that it's impossible to find two people on the planet with the same experience of retirement. I'm sure that can be done, but the nuances and subtleties are quite strong in this regard.
And so what are the kinds of questions, issues that come up as you chat with people about their retirement? And is it about their retirement they're in or their prospective retirement? Roughly when do you start engaging with them?
So let me begin by throwing in a few acronyms. I always find them useful. And in this regard, I've got 4 to share with you, which I think in response to your question will give us a good framework from which we can then start to move forward. So my first acronym is BINAM. BINAM, busy is not always meaningful. So in other words, and I think we often get this experience in our work life where busy is meant to be good because our boss wants us to be busy, or contrariwise, if we're seen to be not busy, that might be a bad thing. I think in retirement, when there's no pressure of a boss, where in effect you are your own boss, you're self-employed, to put it in its simplest terms, it may be more complex, busy does not act as a definite proxy for meaningful. In other words, finding meaning in your retirement, and that's at the centre of my practice, is what's really important. Your level of how busy you are, busyness, is perhaps a good thing, perhaps a bad thing, perhaps neutral, but in my opinion should not always be read as a proxy for the meaning that you are trying to construct in your retired life. So that's acronym number 1. If you've got the appetite, number 2 is on the way. RDS, Relevance Deprivation Syndrome. I think this is reasonably well known, and certainly I didn't create this acronym. It's the feeling, and it is a feeling, that as a worker, in some sense, in many senses, you were relevant. Let's not unpack that word. I think it's pretty clear what I'm getting at. To any number of people in your job. When you stop working, and let's think of a person who moves from full-time work to post-work, as I call it, to complete retirement, because after all, retirement is not a very happy word. It's not a savoury word. It's not a word that people enjoy using. Post-work may be better, and I'm still looking for a candidate word that will fill the shoes of retirement. Perhaps I need to start a competition with a generous prize of $2 on offer for the person who could come up with the best substitute word for retirement. You may find that your relevance is no longer there. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing, but it might be. So being deprived of relevance is another matter to think about. So that's the second acronym. The third is more conventional, SAHS, Stay-at-Home Syndrome. Didn't you, when you worked, get up every Monday morning, I know this is a stereotype, and head off on the bus or in the car or on the train to work? You left home and you came back at night, and you did that perhaps 5 days a week. When you retire, you may find yourself hostage to stay-at-home syndrome, which I think is a bit of a warning sign and something that needs to be thought about and addressed. And then finally, I've got MMAS, or double MAS. I call it the Monday morning after syndrome. You worked for decades in your jobs plural. You come to retire on a Friday, Saturday and Sunday go past in a whiff of euphoria, and then all of a sudden, Monday morning, 7 a.m., you're sitting in the kitchen, there's nothing happening. The phone isn't ringing, the email is turned off, no one's there to talk to. That's what I call the Monday morning after syndrome. It can be quite deflating.
So here I am. I've been relevant in my role before. I've been busy, and now both of those are absent. And I come to you, and I'm asking for your help. How can you help me?
So I'm glad you put into that question, someone has come to me for help, because I need to go back a couple of steps. I did point out that retirement is an experience that can be quite different for two people taken at random. And so there are always going to be people who find themselves happy in their retirement almost from the beginning. And that's good. So the point being that those people probably would not seek a retirement coach. And that's fine. Given that there's so many people out there in retirement mode, we wouldn't want all of them flooding the offices of a retirement coach on a daily basis. Then, in my approach to answering your question, there's a second group of people. I would call those people resistant to any form of coaching. Those people probably would not make happy clients. It would be a difficult experience for both the coach and for the client. And so to answer your question, we're getting to that group of people, and I can't determine its size numerically, but those who recognize they have a problem and come to seek some help. So then to answer your question with regard to that category of people who are seeking help from a retirement coach, and typically they'll be in the age range 55 to 70 plus. They probably won't be under 55. They probably won't be greatly over the age of 70. There can be exceptions, of course, but that's the sweet spot to say. That is people who are on the verge of retirement or people who are recently in retirement. And so coming to the coach, I think the essence of the coaching experience is to help that person, male or female, to find their true meaning or purpose in retired life. Because after all, in a very clear sense, meaning and purpose were conferred on them every day during their work life. That doesn't mean they were happy when they were working, but they pretty much knew why they turned up every Monday morning at 7 or 8 or 9 o'clock, whenever it was, because if they didn't, they would have been given a pretty clear signal by their boss. So the essence is to help them over a period of time to locate by themselves, their own meaning. And this is what, again, comes back to why retirement can be such a diverse experience, and two people can experience it quite differently. Meaning for person A could be quite different for the meaning for person B. So to put it in more practical terms, one person A, may find that devoting herself to charitable works is the pure essence of her meaning in retirement. Another person may decide to sit on committees and help, whether it's their local sporting club or a charity, again, exercising some technical experience they had in their work life, that may give them meaning. But it's very important over the course of the coaching sessions to get to grips with that deep down meaning, and that connects with things such as personal values, which I think we'll touch on later, and needs investigation and can't be discovered quickly. And this leads to an important point I wanted to make. In my version of retirement coaching, there's no formula. It's not a PowerPoint presentation that can be delivered at the conclusion of which a retired or soon-to-retire person can go away and say, I get it, now I'm happy. It needs investigation, excavation, discussion, and of course, most of all, careful listening from the coach so that the client can ultimately understand what their meaning should be.
So when you have a client, is it one person? Is it a couple? Or does it vary?
It is typically one person. It can be a couple. And in that vein, it would be a husband and wife typically. But in the end, it should be one person because, and if you'll let me talk a little bit about the way I engage with my process for retirement coaching, I have what I call the 4M process. And the 4M process, and you'll guess one of the M's, M for meaning, begins with the first M, which is missing, and an investigation of what that person is missing from their work. So I think that already gives us a sense that it's really a question for a single person to answer. And there could be many things you miss from your work. A simple example is work is a social environment for most people. It may not have been true for Captain Ahab in Moby Dick, but for most people it's a social experience. And so a rather simple-minded example I always think of is that if you're inconsequential as a handyman, as I am, and you have a problem at home with, let's say, your kitchen tap, then no better place to get free advice exists than going to work and remembering that Bill, who works in the next office, is a handyman, and you ask Bill, how do I solve my plumbing problem? And he tells you for free. And so that's part of the social life, the society that you may miss from work, and it's a matter to contemplate. The second is M for measuring, and this is where we see the stark difference between working life and retired life. In working life, at least in my experience, that life is heavily dominated by a timetable, a calendar, a set of activities, and they can be quite brutal, the famous back-to-back meetings that occupy you from morning to night. Well, when you're retired or about to retire, and this is something I do with clients, I get them to display their calendar for the next month or so, and then we examine all the white spaces. And in measuring those white spaces, that raises all sorts of concerns and anxieties that lead us to the next M, which is meaning, because meaning, once located, and I'm not suggesting that the meaning once located lasts for the next 20 or 30 years. You can change it. I wouldn't recommend you change it daily, weekly, monthly or yearly, but you can change it. It's that meaning that helps you to understand what it is you're going to be doing on a daily or weekly basis in the future. And then finally, the last M is mastery. So my example for that is if you always wanted to be a fantastic clarinet player but never had the time, now in retirement, time is no excuse. Buy the clarinet, get the teacher, take the lessons, practice every day, and become a master of that aspect of your personal meaning. That's the 4M process which I wanted to emphasize because I think it gives a nice framework for the coaching discussion with a particular and individual client.
That's a lovely framework, and one of the nice things about it is that it copes with so many different dimensions. Now, One of the things you've also mentioned, though, is that being busy is not always meaningful. So you clearly with different people, presumably different M's are more relevant than others.
That's correct. I frame that slightly differently. Again, going back to working life, the clock is the cruel master of working life. There are always things to be done under the dominion of a timepiece. A report has to be written by a certain time, or something needs to be fixed on a certain day. Time seems to be everything. And yet in retirement, where time almost subsides into the background, I think a more important way to measure a day or a week is through levels of energy. Let me explain what I mean by that. I'm talking about how some tasks in life do not give a lot of joy. I'm thinking in my own case, doing accounts, doing accounting is not something I particularly enjoy. I'm sure other people get great pleasure from it, and that's terrific for them. So I tend to corral those activities into a time of day when I feel I've got just enough energy to give them the attention they need. But in terms of energy, I like to dedicate my energy to those activities that give me enormous pleasure. So I could give you some examples from my private life, but I won't digress on that. But I think you will get the point that perhaps a more important measure of a retired person's day is not what she did or he did at 10 o'clock or 4 o'clock. It's where do they get enjoyment from expending their energy? Where do they have their reserves of energy? What do they do to build up their reservoirs of energy? You know, for some people, sitting in a quiet place and reading a book is a wonderful way to replenish those depleted reservoirs of energy. That's a good thing to do. And so by paying attention to energy levels, and, you know, even in a retired life, there's going to be a certain amount of frantic activity, things that need to be done, trains that need to be caught, errands that need to be run. That's fine. That will intrude, and necessarily so. There will be these glorious periods of quietness, the ability to reflect, and the sense of being able to measure your own personal energy and how you are using it to best effect.
Jon, it's Alex here. One of the things that strikes me is that a lot of the questions that you're asking of your clients and the frameworks you use, they're certainly relevant to retirement, but it strikes me that they're quite relevant to the rest of life as well. And, you know, when people maybe accept work by definition as the source of meaning, or they accept their work schedule as kind of the default best way to use their energy, there may be a better, more thoughtful approach to that.
Yes. If I hear you correctly, Alex, you're saying that some of these principles could apply to a phase of life prior to retirement. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it certainly seems that way.
I think that's absolutely correct. How that could be done, where there are so many competing agents who are in that space offering their own kind of advice, is not clear to me. But that said, in a theoretical sense, of course, all of these things could apply, with one exception. Work life has a habit for most people of being all-consuming. And we don't need to suggest for a moment that that's a defect, because work has a wonderful benefit. Apart from giving you meaning, it gives you a salary. But it also gives you something else, and I wanted to touch on this. I sometimes challenge my clients in a rather cheeky way by asking, what did they have written on their business card? And I appreciate not everybody carries a business card, but if you let me speak to this stereotype, I'll develop it further. I ask them, what do they have written on their business card under their names and their extensive qualifications, etc., before their telephone number and email address? And of course, they always have a title. Maybe it could be a very fancy title, director, managing director, or salesperson, whatever. That is my point, to then poke them with the question, and what would you like your business card to say now that you've stopped working? Would you be happy for it to say name, and before getting to the telephone number and email address, retired person? No one's actually taken to that with enthusiasm. And that's why there's a reason for that, I think, and it's the mythical meeting with a stranger. This almost sounds like a an ancient Greek legend where you meet a stranger at the crossroads. And when you, typically you might meet an interesting person at a dinner party, and once you've exhausted politics and sport, the conversation may turn to the age-old question, and tell me, what do you do for a living? Well, of course, that opens the faucet, the spigot, to a long description of all the important things you do with your job, or perhaps you describe them in modesty, but nonetheless you talk about what you do in your workplace, and that's fine. But how do you answer that question when you're retired? Do you want to, and I challenge clients with this, do you want to say, oh, what a great question. Yes, well, I'm a retired person. Full stop. I don't think so. And then if you go on to talk about your recent experience in finding some opportunities to buy cheap clothes online or shop cheaply at your local supermarket, that may elicit some yelps of delight from the person you're talking to, or it may lead them to ask, where's the bathroom? And a speedy departure from the table will ensue. So it's kind of, how do you want to think about yourself? And this again comes down to your meaning. Maybe a good answer for a particular person would be to say, I'm studying the clarinet and I'm having my first concert at Carnegie Hall next week. Would you like to come along?
It's interesting that these issues relate to work life as well in a way, but it's the stop of a work life and the transition to the next life, from life one to life two, I think, that causes these to suddenly become so important, and they cause gaps, and it's your role to help people fill those gaps in the way that best suits them. The irony to me is that once they've done that, they might then later on want to put on their business card, happily retired. But that takes an amount of confidence, and you don't get that right at the start, do you?
That's an excellent question. I agree. So because I like to engage in fairly practical, even mundane concerns with my clients, let me raise a couple of them if I may. And that is, and again, I need to set up a kind of a stereotypical person, because then at least I can ground my conversation in something that is real and true. And that person, let's say, has a job that requires that he goes to work every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and gets the weekends off. So that means that, and again, to pick on a stereotype, I'll say it's a he. He's married, and his wife is a stay-at-home person. I don't put that forward to insult anyone, but I think it's the majority description of our society. And so when the day he retires, there's going to be a radical shift in his domestic circumstances. Why so? Well, he will potentially be in the house now Monday through Friday. That could, it doesn't have to, but it could cause problems for his wife, who's had, by custom, apart from the 4 weeks annual holiday, the house to herself. And all of a sudden, he's in the house. And so I think Virginia Woolf understood this quite well. You need to have a room of one's own. You need to have a kind of an agreement on how to make use of the space in the house. Otherwise, there could be some fairly bruising encounters. And why would you want that? And this is the purpose of coaching. It's to habituate, make clients aware of these problems so they can think about them and talk about them. And with regard to talk, another thing that comes up is in your working life, and again, let's go back to our stereotypical pair, husband and wife. The husband comes home from work and is full of stories about his day. They could be positive, they could be negative. They could be, I had a great day today, I scored a big success, or that person in the office is driving me mad, and, after a long palaver about that, that's all very good. But at the very least, it's satisfied the qualification of being something to talk about. What in retirement do you bring to the dinner table to talk about? It may be the person who bumped their trolley into you at the supermarket. Yeah, sure. It may be the problems with the traffic lights as you drove somewhere. Yeah, that's fine. It's all conversation. But I try to alert people to have a little think about what quality of conversation would they really like to have in retirement. Because I think, again, coming back to the space of the house or the apartment where two retired people live, they've just got to be thinking about what they're doing all day long and how they can negotiate that space and how they can come together and talk sensibly when they're together. Because I think the idea of a retired couple sitting in the same house or apartment 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, that's probably a little bit scary, and I don't think that's desirable. So there needs to be time together, time apart. Time apart is good for both people. Time together is good. You've got things to talk about and share. And so these are the practical considerations that I like to bring to the attention of my clients.
I love, Jon, the focus on the everyday that you're covering now, because so much of the image we have, at least for us pre-retirement folks, of retirement are maybe more the exceptional moments, or maybe the moments that never happen, you know, the couple holding hands on a beach, or deck chairs here in Canada is a common trope. But I wanted to ask you, you know, in the clients that you serve, do you see patterns in the people that you think maybe do the best job of finding meaning in retirement? And maybe could you share some of those patterns, if there are recognizable ones?
I think the most successful encounters are with the people who, at the end of the sessions, plural, really start to think deeply about their meaning in life. But rather than, I'll come back to that, but let me give another example, if I may, which can be quite confusing to people. I like to talk about legacy. And legacy immediately raises the financial flag. People think, oh gosh, will I give money to the children or grandchildren, or will I make a bequest, or put my name in an art gallery somewhere, having donated an artwork, and that's all good, but that's not the legacy I have in mind, because I should just state at the outset, retirement coaches don't talk about money. That's for financial planners and other people. It's the emotional legacy I like to talk to people about. I like to prod them and get them to think about what their emotional legacy should be. And what do I mean by that? I sometimes call it their trace in the world. So as you get older and then eventually die, or I think nowadays you're not allowed to talk about people dying, they pass. But when you eventually die, you'll be remembered for something. What will that be? And to dream about that prior to your death is quite an interesting conversation starter, because it gets people just pondering what their strengths and weaknesses are. And then they start to think about their relationship to their network of friends and relatives, which perhaps they've neglected for the 3 to 4 decades of hard work, where they've been just too busy. You know, the old, I'd love to get together with my friends, but I'm too busy, and maybe I'll see them at the end of the year sort of dialogue that we're all familiar with. All of a sudden, in retirement, you have time aplenty to meet up and with friends and build that social network. And I think that's an extremely important thing to do. And therefore, coming back to legacy, that may be your legacy, that you'll be someone who's well remembered in a certain way, maybe not always positively, but you'd hope so, as someone who contributed to their social network, who had a social network, who was friendly, who was available, who could sit and listen to people's joys and problems, which, could we agree, comes close to the essence of friendship, whatever friendship might mean. The nicest essays I've seen on friendship were written 2,000 years ago by the Roman statesman and philosopher Cicero, and he makes a nice comment. He says, if you, and we have to put ourselves in togas and go back 2,000 years here to think about the significance, he makes the point that most people, and of course his friends were prosperous and successful, most people can answer the simple question, how many sheep or pigs do I have? They can give you the exact answer to that. And then you ask them, how many friends do you have? And they can't answer that question. Now, that's partly because it's not clear how to define friendship, but I think what he's really getting at in his ironic Latinate way is that we don't think about it enough. And retirement is a wonderful time, a wonderful place in your life to think about friendships.
And that gets back to the issue that we are social creatures first and foremost. And so that one of the worst things that can happen in retirement is anxiety and loneliness.
Yes, I think that's so important. My personal theory, and I'm not a psychologist, so therefore I'm not qualified to speak to this in depth, is that anxiety and loneliness are the twin conditions that are starting to plague our societies. And anxiety, if it's perhaps more prevalent amongst younger people, loneliness is certainly more prevalent amongst older people. And so if there's anything that could act as an antidote to loneliness in retirement, to my way of thinking, it has to be the existence of a vigorous network of friends and relatives. Let's not forget relatives, they are important, with whom one communes on a regular basis. Now, there's no formula here. I don't think even Cicero had a formula, but there's ample time to contemplate and really work at it. And let me make this point to mock myself. This causes consternation amongst my circle of friends and relatives. I actually maintain a spreadsheet, very simple piece of technology. Each row represents a friend or a relative with whom I want to maintain a connection, and each column is a month. And so I will know when I last met up with the person on row 7. It might have been 6 months ago, and that will prompt me to think perhaps I should ask them out for coffee again. It's time to see them. And anyone I tell this to, particularly younger people, need at least a minute to recover from laughing. But I think it's a nice little practical way of almost mechanising friendship. And I don't mean to suggest for a minute that can ever be done. I'm simply taking it to the level of making sure that I see the people I want to see on the regular basis that I want to see them. And should I say, that they want to see me. Not every invitation for coffee or lunch is met with enthusiasm.
Well, Jon, thank you for sharing that, and I feel obliged to. I'm 39, and so I'm not meeting that at all with laughter. And I was actually reflecting on the fact that I myself, in the last few months, took some time to think about, okay, who are some people, writing down, just the act of writing down in a journal, who are some people that I've really enjoyed spending time with over the last year. Who are some people that I haven't seen in a long time, and then just making a deliberate plan to reconnect with them. And it's amazing how we focus so much on kind of building up financial capital towards retirement and all this discussion about the magic number that you need, and very little time building up social capital, because I think part of the point you're making is that friends don't, automatically just show up the day you retire. You've got to work at that over time.
Correct. Yep. And we've talked again and again about time, but I think that's something very important for people in retirement to give contemplation to, and a nice catchphrase that actually a friend, not a client, because I obviously, being a person obsessed with the concept of retirement, learn a lot from my friends as well as from clients. And one of my friends put it very nicely by saying that she sometimes worries that in retirement she's a slave to her free time. A slave to her free time. I still haven't quite unpacked that. I don't fully understand it, but I think there's something quite profound there. Because, of course, the simple message we've all assimilated is free time equals whoopee, can't wait. So that's clearly the case with weekends for those who are still working. That's wonderful. That's free time. That's what I look forward to. But what happens when it turns the other way and time becomes something that is your master and you're a slave to it? Again, as I said, I'm not sure I fully understand it, but I get the emotional significance. And so one's relationship to time is important, and I was saying before, one's relationship to energy is important. But I think we can go a little bit deeper, because although most of my work is dedicated to giving practical outcomes to clients, I think there's still some deeper levels where they can think about issues such as, what are their true values in life? Now, there's, I think, any number of websites where you can answer questionnaires that will then expose to you what you value most, what your deepest values are, things such as honesty, charity, love, learning. So if one of those surveys uncovers that learning is your top priority, that's a strong indication, not something forceful, but a strong indication that maybe you need to go and do some study. If, on the other hand, learning is down the bottom of the values and charity or love comes near the top, maybe that's pushing you in the direction of giving to other people, perhaps through charitable acts. Again, these are only signposts and guideposts. They're not strict in their meaning, but I think it gives a little bit of guidance as to what because you understand your values a little bit better, then where can you give value in the broader society? And therefore, and this is an important pun, how can you feel valued? Let's go back to work life. You feel valued every time your boss gives you a pat on the back and says, good work. You feel valued every time you complete some project that might have taken you months and you have brought it to a successful conclusion. You feel valued every time you get a pay rise or a bonus. These acts of feeling valued, giving value and connecting with your deepest values, I think need, in most cases, to be reconstructed from the ground up in retirement, because it's not so obvious. You no longer have that boss who can help you to understand where you're being valued. I think in most cases it's a good thing to think it through from the bootlaces up. Which brings me to another point I wanted to make, which is there is a role for boredom in retired life. I don't think there's a role for boredom at work, because if you're caught and found out to be bored, well, the boss will fix that pretty quickly, give you an extra workload to carry through. But, boredom can occur naturally in retired life, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. And if I can give you a quote which I particularly get joy from that's relevant in this regard, it comes from a German philosopher from last century called Walter Benjamin, and he said, boredom is the dream bird that hatches the egg of experience. A rustling in the leaves drives him away. So what am I driving at here? I'm not driving the dream bird away. It's that there's a strange mixture that can overcome you when you're sitting in your house at 10 o'clock on a Monday morning. You might feel bored, but you may then use that to get into the flow, and that's when you pick up your clarinet and think about nothing else but playing the clarinet for half an hour. But one of the real dangers is that you seek to be distracted, and this is where digital media can be so intrusive in a retired life. You can spend all day on YouTube, Facebook, email, internet. You can do that. But I challenge people, and I particularly challenge myself. Why am I doing this? Why do I have this need to be distracted? Can I get into the flow of some activity, which usually is so successful, or can I allow myself to be bored and look out the window, which I think is what 4-year-olds are particularly good at doing. Adults seem to lose that facility, or perhaps they have it drummed out of them by their parents and their partners. So that's another concept I wanted to cover, just to give a sense of the richness of activities in the day of a retired person and all the different things they can think about, but not so that they overthink them, just to be aware of all the matters that can occur, all the things that can arise, and then you find your own path, once you've got your meaning, to a successful and fulfilling retirement.
Yeah, John, part of what I find really exciting about this conversation is I'm just picturing in my head this kind of vast, untapped human potential in a way, of if people really give careful thought to these questions about how they're going to live the later phase of their life, they can have a much richer life. And what's striking me is really how little attention we pay as societies to this question. I mean, you have the number of times an adult asks you as you're growing up, what do you want to be when you get older? Meaning, what do you want your career to be? It would be difficult to count. The number of times you have a conversation, at least, at someone of my age, how do you want to spend, age, 65 to 85 plus? You can barely count. And part of what I'm wondering is, how do we as a society focus more on these questions with people? Because it seems like there's a huge opportunity to make people's lives better.
I completely agree with you, and I think a comment was made earlier by one of you, I can't remember which, about how retirement has been riveted to the idea of financial security. And the whole of society speaks to the essence, necessity of financial security, and I'd be the last person to speak against that proposition. However, if that's the only script that's available for people to read once they move or are about to move into retirement, that, to the point of your question, misses out on all the opportunities there are. The opportunities to have pleasure, to have fun, and to give to the broader society. So I'll give you an example from my private life. In our schooling system in Australia, there is the possibility for primary school children, that's children from age 5 to 12, to receive lessons on ethics. And this is where the children sit in the classroom. They have delivered by the teacher, and I'm a voluntary ethics teacher, a script, it may be a fable or a story, and then it promotes a debate amongst these children on really important issues such as what is the meaning of giving and how much charity should one engage in, and what does it mean to tell a lie, and should you always tell the truth. And these are wonderful topics for 8-year-olds to think about. I think they're wonderful topics for 38-year-olds and 58-year-old people to think about. These are living topics, and the point of these classes is to get the young children to articulate a point of view, listen to an opposite point of view, debate with another student, and if not resolve their differences, at least have some respect for other opinions. What am I getting at here? That's an activity that I could not have engaged in were I still working full-time, because I need to go to the school along with the other teachers during the morning when I would normally have been at work. But I can do that now, and that's a really important thing for me to do, and it puts me into the broader society, albeit in a very small way. My point is, to answer your question, there are myriad ways in which society can realise that there is this vast untapped potential of people in the age range, let's say 60 plus, who are physically fit, mentally able, and desirous of giving something from themselves in a charitable way back to society, and helping and being visible and being part of society, and addressing that acronym I had earlier on in the interview, SAHS, stay-at-home syndrome. I don't think that's a good thing to suffer from. And society is not thinking about these things, although the potential for a plague of loneliness is starting to emerge. I was particularly struck last year on holidays in the Netherlands, we can't call it Holland anymore, it's the Netherlands, to see a building on the seafront in a small town, which is, I think if I can do justice to it, in Dutch called a praathuis. In English it's a chat house, and it's simply a structure, proof against the weather. Inside there are tables and chairs. Anyone is free to go in there and engage in conversation with anyone else who is there. And I think that's a wonderful idea. And the more society builds infrastructure, I'm not suggesting chat houses at every street corner, the more society dedicates to thinking about these things, the better off we'll be. We'll have a chance of warding off loneliness as a social problem. It's always going to be an individual problem for certain people. But what I think we don't want is to have loneliness as a social problem, because, to the very question, that means we're depriving society of all this energy and goodwill and experience that retired people can bring and donate to society at large.
What I like about all of this is that these are things to think about. It's not as if these are questions that have a right answer for everyone and one size fits all. These are just things to think about, and we will all have different answers to them and go off and be self-satisfied in an individual way. And the idea that someone can help us identify what are the things we should think about, what kinds of ways and should we think about it, and then answer those questions for ourselves, I think is just enormously helpful and constructive.
I completely agree, and this is where society hasn't caught up to the concepts we're talking about, in the sense that I believe there's a cohort of people out there who have retired, who are not happy. They may be busy, but they haven't located their meaning. They're kind of distracted and bored and restless, but they don't understand that there is help out there. There are people called retirement coaches who can be of help in the very practical ways we've been discussing. But I think society hasn't yet caught up to the fact that the service exists. So, trivial example, if you have a toothache, you know that you need to go to the dentist. No one needs to tell you that. So there's a problem for which you've worked out the cause. It's a problem you can't fix yourself, and you know there's somebody out there who can fix it for you, called a dentist. The problems I'm identifying in retired people's emotional state is that they often don't realise there is a cause for this, which is their lack of meaning, and therefore if they only knew that there was a remedy in the form of a retirement coaching service, I think it would make for many better outcomes. So again, coming back to the earlier question, it's the case that, in my opinion, and I'm speaking for Australia, but I believe it's true elsewhere, we just haven't thought of retirement beyond the need for financial security, and it's about time we started to do that.
I know we're getting a little bit near the end of our time, but I did want to ask you about any reading recommendations that you might have for people if you were putting together a list of a few books or articles that someone could read, and they can be related to retirement or they could just be related to life and some of these other issues you've talked about. Do you have any books that you recommend to your clients or others that are thinking through these questions?
There's not a lot of them. If you go to the self-help section of a bookshop, there's just so many books on self-help. It's sometimes difficult to find those that relate to the emotional side of retirement. And by the time you've discarded the books that relate to the financial aspects of retirement, I think it's a fairly small collection. So what I would say in answer to your question is one of the cleverer authors in this regard is a man who wrote years ago. His name is Jon Gardner. And Jon Gardner, he really captivated me with an article which began with a discussion of barnacles and led to a discussion of all sorts of emotional aspects of life, including meaning and then retirement. And I figured anyone who can begin with the discussion of barnacles has certainly got my attention. So, no, there's not a lot out there, but you can find people blogging. I myself write blog posts on the internet, and the writings exist. But all said and done, I think of retirement coaching as the way of dealing with the issues we've been discussing as a very practical enterprise which ultimately comes down to one-on-one conversations, coach and client. So I've given a disappointing answer to your question, and it may be my ignorance. Perhaps a deeper search of bookshelves around the world would reveal more of these books, but I'm not aware of them.
Well, it sounds like you're drawing on other disciplines outside the retirement field. I mean, you mentioned Cicero, and you got the quote from Walter Benjamin, and yes. It's a wider lens that you're bringing to this.
And actually, you've helped me to give an even bigger answer to your very good question. There's plenty of people saying clever things in this world, but they're not called retirement coaches. They may be philosophers or statesmen or people writing their memoirs. They tend to be excellent writers, and they have clever things to say, not all of them about retirement, not all of them relevant to retirement, but in so many cases will touch upon the essence of being human and the essence of meaning. I think there's a lot. I'll now revise my answer. There's too much to read out there. The trick is how to find it.
And putting it all together is exactly what you have done for our listeners today. And we thank you for that, and we think this has been just terrific. Thank you, Jon.
Thank you very much.
If you'd like to find out more about Jon, you can visit his website at 64plus, that's 64plus.com.au. And he provides his retirement coaching services not only in person, but also over Skype. So if you happen to live outside of Australia, you can also get in touch.
Hi, this is Don. Welcome again to The Personal Touch, that short final part of our Life 2 podcast in which my goal is to take the insights that our global experts give us in their interviews and try to adapt them for the ordinary person, so you can make your own life better and more practical and more fulfilling. And that is my purpose with the personal touch. Today's episode is called Transition. We've talked about getting started, getting serious, and getting set to leave full-time work. Now we're talking about the transition into life 2, the first time we give up our familiar routine. Perhaps if we're really good, even preparing for it before it happens. Our expert is Jon Glass, a retirement coach, one of a new breed that I think we'll see a lot more of in the future. I feel that way for personal reasons. One is that when I graduated from full-time work almost 10 years ago, I didn't expect there to be a sort of in-between transition stage. It took me by surprise. It was a slow adjustment. Here's what I said about it. About a year or so after I started, I made notes so I can tell you exactly what I said at the time. I said, I feel I'm a tree that has been uprooted. For over 40 years, I've planted my roots deep, very deep, into soil that nurtured growth. I loved the experience of life and work. It had a pattern, it had a rhythm that I grew deeply attached to, even though I periodically complained about it and dreamed of the day when I could become self-indulgent. Harry Levinson, who in his time was a pioneering professor of psychology at Harvard Medical School, implicitly predicted how I'd feel. He said in his book Psychological Man, he said, all change is loss, and all loss must be mourned. Anyway, my flourishing 40-year-old tree has been uprooted. I need to plant a new tree. I'm not entirely sure I know the kind of tree I want it to be, nor exactly where I want to plant it, nor if I'll change my mind. I simply can't be sure because experiencing this freedom to choose, freedom that I've dreamed about, freedom that was the first word in our family Christmas letter last year, it's still new and I'm not used to it. And even though some roots are growing in new soil, their new roots are not yet deep, and only time will give them traction. So I'm in psychological transition. And because it's so powerful, it's really a whole stage between accumulation and decumulation, and we should give transition its due and call it a potentially long intermediate stage. And that's where I am right now. Okay. That's what I said at the time. If there had been retirement coaches then, I'd have sought the help of one. Instead, I had to do it myself, some things working well, others not so well. I also learned a lot from research over the years via the internet, which is my standard approach, because I want to benefit from the wisdom of others, people like Jon. My transition is now well behind me. I am thoroughly enjoying the best of life 2, and I'm writing about it, and I'm delighted I've been invited to conferences around the world to speak about it. What's even better is the way my learning is received. Inevitably, the conferences I'm invited to are attended by, the geeky, nerdy type, people for whom finance is their day-to-day occupation. And what I love is the fact that they are thrilled that someone is talking to them about real life, about the psychological side, because they feel it too. And they come up to me, and they're so eager to talk about it. I'm just thrilled to be able to talk to them about it. The fun thing is that it's even the younger ones at these conferences. They tap me on the shoulder and they say, I recognize what you're describing. I see my dad, I see my mom, etc., etc., etc. And what they all love is that these psychological aspects are out in the open and they know they're not alone. And that is very reassuring. And that's why we wanted to interview Jon for our podcast, to make you aware of feelings that are very common and what's available to overcome them. And it's not just you who might benefit, it's also society. I was very taken with the remark Alex made in the podcast, to the effect that when people make a successful transition into life 2, there's a vast untapped human potential there, and society pays no attention to this. We're unaware of that potential. One day that'll change. Now, I don't know if you're someone who feels a bit concerned about the transition to life 2. If you are, I don't know if you're someone who might seek out a retirement coach. Or if coaching is not for you, maybe you have more of a do-it-yourself mentality. If you're a do-it-yourselfer or as background before chatting with a retirement coach, I've written up some lessons in my Life 2 book. As you'll have gathered, There isn't a common right answer for everyone, but there are some good questions you can ask yourself. And the answers you give to those questions will take you forward a lot. And that angle came through a lot from Jon, didn't it? Let me give you two personal approaches that I've used myself. The first gets to grips with the really deep question that some people face when they leave the familiar surroundings of the workplace, because they wonder, who am I? Because they define themselves by their role at work. They may spend more time at work than at home. If that's you, here are 3 questions for you. Take your time over finding your personal answers. First question, you have all the money you need. How would you live your life? Second question, you've just found out you have 5 to 10 years to live. How will you change your life? Third question, you've just found out you have 24 hours to live. What are your regrets? That's profound, isn't it? Something about your priorities should come out of that exercise if you do it. Now, if you don't want to get that deep, and thank goodness not everyone wants to get that deep, here's another way to think about your purpose and your activities. And it starts with a reminder that life is about more than just money. Let me give you 6 other aspects: family and friends, work and play, physical and mental health. Mental health includes spiritual health. Think of those 6, along with money, as 7 asset classes in your portfolio of life's abundance. Geeky audiences like the investment analogy a lot. Anyway, think about how you would rate your satisfaction with each component, let's say on a scale of 1 to 10. Then think about what you might do to raise your score in each. And that too is a way to define your purpose. The bottom line for me here is that we all think about these things, but too often we're scared to admit it. I think the big benefit from my talking about these matters is that people realize they're not alone. In fact, this is very common. And that's the first step, the biggest step to feeling better, because it puts you back in control. And that's it from me, my personal touch on the transition from Life 1 to Life 2. I hope you found it helpful. Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Life 2 podcast. To purchase Don's latest book, visit donezra.com. And for more information on any of our guest experts, check out Commonwealth's website at cwretirement.com/podcast.